Good. Jeremy, I would like to start with the conference that is today in Munich. And there was something really interesting that Wolfgang Ischner said about this conference. He's the chair of the security conference. And he said that Europe is surrounded by a ring of fire. How you can interpret that?
I'm not completely sure what his context is, but I'm guessing that basically Europe and the EU is seen as such a whole unit that it's quite often difficult to break in, but also the fire could refer to the tensions and difficulties around the edges. If you look at, for example, say Russia as an interesting political situation, and the Middle East as well, there are difficulties to overcome. But I think what possibly needs to be done is a bit more open communication between continents, between economic regions, and just get dialogue going. And I'm guessing what he's basically saying is that at the moment it's quite protected, but it needs to be broken down, and maybe those flames need to be damped down a bit, or some kind of access made through them, so that the US, so other countries can engage with Europe and vice versa.
Okay, thank you. And how do you think that Biden will succeed to shape this relation and the new administration? What's going to be there?
How do I think?
Biden administration. What?
I think, well, he's going to be interesting because we've watched successive presidents, so recent presidents, Trump, Obama, and now Biden, have a different approach to international role and international profile. The key issue for the Americans at the moment, and like many countries, is that we're all keen to look internally at our issues. So with COVID, and then health issues and welfare and all sorts of problems there. In America, obviously, currently they've got some very extreme weather, and I know we'll talk about Texas in a moment, but the extreme weather that's having a dramatic impact on what should be a very, very advanced society, but suddenly, in parts, I mean, at its worst, I think I've heard of people who've been without water and power for up to 4 days, and in freezing temperatures, which parts of Europe are used to, but in Texas, it's certainly such a rare occurrence. You've also got dramatic changes in temperature as well. So last week it was in centigrade -10. Next week it's going to +20 on Tuesday. So a massive swing in temperatures, which again, those effects. There's a privatization program in terms of energy supply that needs to be addressed. So I think the short answer is that President Biden has got a lot of internal issues to address, but I'm sure he wants to establish himself as a collaborator on the world stage. He obviously has to differentiate himself from the previous president, and this is very much America First program, which was quite assertive, quite aggressive. You could argue that you would want your politicians to put your own country first, and that's understandable. But I think it depends on the tone, which is, yes, we want to be first, but not at the not by causing damage to others. And how can we bring other countries and other markets with us as we put ourselves forward and go first? So I would hope that there'll be more collaborative, more conciliatory, and more cooperative.
Because some other countries are using this rhetoric about the first and to putting their country at first place, and they're using it at terms of the international law, and they said like no law is our law is above the international law, and we can do whatever we want. And even in terms of ecology and global warming and all that,
it is, and it's something that we see happening with the Brexit negotiations, and this is really interesting because obviously my experience of Brexit is predominantly couched in terms of UK media and UK impacts and British impacts, and that's why it's really valuable to talk to economies like the Bulgarian economy and others around Europe, to understand the feeling in those countries and those places that want to continue with the relationship. But yes, we've got concerns that some of the rhetoric used was around whether, for example, Brexit is going to damage environmental legislation, environmental impacts in the UK markets. Employment legislation has been questioned as well. Generally, we'll feel that we've got a good level in the UK, but the big debate last year was that any agreement, for example, with the US was going to mean that we had to take the wonderfully titled chlorinated chicken. Became quite a moment in our public consciousness as we started looking at supply chains of food, pricing, and so on and so forth. So the My Country First program can be seen as something that's quite, it sort of serves populists and extremists, and what we need to do is have a bit more conciliation, that rather than saying we're going to come first at your disbenefit, we're going to do as much as we can to grow and bring you with us. And I think that would be a much better place to be, but it's challenging at the moment.
There was a lot of yes, about the Brexit and a lot of history in Bulgaria of can you describe it, like what exactly happened? Because in my opinion, it's like there is no such a big change in terms of trade and in terms of financial services, and even in terms of labor, because I have another business in London, and it's doing pretty well.
So I think there's a couple of things. One, the impacts of Brexit are probably being slightly minimized because we're coming from a low base with the impact of COVID. So we already have depressed economies and markets and difficult trading conditions. And as a result, any negative impact from Brexit has been slightly minimized or reduced as a result of that. I think where we're going to see difficulties start to come in is when the movement of goods. And it's interesting because the call before this was with a UK company that was working in Finland, but because the details of, and they're a data examination business, so a data and infrastructure company, because of the details around the data agreements between the EU and the UK and the US are still to be defined. They're not sure how long their projects will last for, but also the employment visas that are needed to send UK citizens into the EU to work are being defined. So, for example, at the moment, we've got a very simple thing that we're only allowed to be in the EU for a total of 90 days out of 180. Now, if you work and go on holiday in the EU, you can use that up quite quickly. So I think we're going to see some impacts. The other thing, of course, and a point was made to me the other day, and I think it needs considering, is that a lot of the difficulties that people talk about are almost self-fulfilling. And what I mean there is that if you start to say goods are going to be slower, there's going to be tariffs, there's going to be delays, things will cost more, then things will cost more because we've talked about it and we've created this feeling. And there are people who are possibly being opportunistic about using a geopolitical event to take advantage to either introduce delays or cause delays or accept delays and accept price rises. So I think we need to see how that comes together. But the point that I think is really interesting, and it was made again in conversation the other day, was that prior to the end of the year, there was, and this is the UK perspective, we had UK trade with the EU, which was under kind of no tariff, no delays, no borders, free, quite open. And then we had UK trade with non-EU, which was related to different countries and different agreements and worked well. There was paperwork, there was employment rights, there's all sorts of things. And the question that was asked of me was, well, why haven't we just taken the previous non-EU stuff and just apply it to the EU? Whereas we've almost created this third relationship of non-EU, non-rest of the world trading, employing and things like that, which seems to be quite complicated. And I don't have an answer for that. I think the big question is the fact that there's a lot of things which aren't answered yet, and they will be resolved. And there are opportunities that have come out of anything. Chaos creates opportunity, but it's challenging to know when it's going to settle down, and it also depends what your market is and where you go. Talking to UK businesses about the impact, I've got one guy, he says that plastic cups from Slovakia have a 10% tariff applied to them now, whereas before they never used to have. So the answer is find plastic cups from somewhere else. or move that tariff on. Now 10% bulk on plastic cups is quite minimal because they're very, very low cost. So 10% of a cent is a tenth of a cent, and so on and so forth. But it is something that's beginning to happen. We're beginning to see some impact where tariffs are being introduced, and then there are shipping delays as well.
And how about the brand Global Britain, and with the transatlantic trade agreement? Is it possible the vision about the Singapore on Thames?
Possible about the sorry?
Singapore on Thames. That is part of the vision about the Global Britain.
Yes, yeah, this idea that I mean, I have a little skepticism on it, because part of me feels a little. I find it difficult personally, because we've moved from being in a position where we had trade with our very near neighbours. We've got the map behind me, and you can see where Britain is, and if I go that way, you can see where Singapore is. It's down here. So you've got that distance, that physical distance. It's becoming less so. I think COVID actually has made the world smaller. So in my work, I've been able to engage quite easily with the Philippines and quite easily with the west coast of America and South America, as easily as the EU. Whereas before, if you wanted to trade with different nations, it was very much, well, if you want to come to Manila, we'll have a chat with you. Whereas now we can do this, and the fact we can do this is much easier. Going back 2 years, if I wanted to do anything with the British Bulgarian Business Association, it was generally either whenever they were in London, or if I was prepared and able to come out to Sofia. Now we're running virtual events all the time, and in fact, I've got one coming up in a few weeks' time where we're basically putting on a pan-European discussion on Brexit and the impacts, and I'll make sure you get an invite to that as well. But and I'm doing that through a platform that's a community platform that's based in Belgium, and we're bringing in, I think, Spain, Romania, Brussels, and the UK. So the world has become smaller. In terms of your question, Singapore trade agreements, we've always had an impetus, even before Brexit, I think, in the UK, to try and build our role and profile in the ASEAN, Southeast Asia countries. So I think that's ongoing. There is kind of, because of the Australasian link, I think we've always had a good relationship with Southeast Asia, and that needs to grow on. But by definition, going back to what we said before, the likelihood is that we will have to we'll have to be mindful that areas are going to be very much looking at for themselves first rather than second. So we have to be a bit careful and mindful of that.
And because you're in the British Bulgarian Trade Chamber, what will be the new reality for Bulgaria in terms of international trade? Because a lot of things are changing anyways, willing or not.
I think trade will continue as it is to a certain degree. It's just that stuff may take longer to get somewhere, and there may be tariffs and things may be marginally more expensive, but the willingness will be there. And it's quite interesting because we've got this event coming up in March, which is a Bulgarian wine event being presented in London virtually. They've got a merchant in London who's providing it, but it's going to be delivered by wineries from Bulgaria. And in fact, again, this new way of virtual working has been quite remarkable in terms of opening up markets, but you do need someone on the ground. So you were saying that you have a business based in London that's doing well. We still need to have people in country to do things, and I think that's where the opportunities come. It's just working out the logistics of the people coming and going, and the ability to travel is obviously not there at the moment. So personally, I'm looking forward to my vaccination and my vaccination passport. I can't wait.
Yeah, I did my first vaccine today.
You did?
Yes.
You're so young.
As a journalist.
Okay, good one, good reason. Yeah,
Yes.
it is interesting. I mean, I'm 58, so I'm beginning to see my peers starting to have them in the UK, which is great. That vaccination program is being accelerated. It's then how it impacts on travel and on other countries, and if you want to travel to a country. But again, you see, if you wanted to go to Africa or Middle East or Far East or different countries, then you would have to have proof of tetanus, typhoid, yellow fever, malaria, all sorts of things. So again, a lot of the stuff that we think is new about Brexit or new about COVID, we just have to accept and adapt that it's a slightly different way of living and working.
You know, Jeremy, for me it was really strange because I was living really long time in Canada, and there, if you want to travel somewhere, you have to make like a pack of vaccines, and for me it was like something as usual. And now all this fear that is surrounding the vaccine, all these rumors and all these things, for me it's like, my personal opinion is that is political, and it's something like that was created around the Brexit. It's like some sort of propaganda that is used. And what is your opinion? Like all these conspiracy theories, all these things, and that are used to blame one or the other side, and to create this uncertainty in the people. And in Bulgaria, it's a big problem.
It is, and if you speak to a conspiracy theorist and then try and disprove their sources or their conspiracy, then actually you're proving that they were right to think there's a conspiracy. This is, you know, there's someone I've given up talking to because of that. Sometimes you just have to let people believe what they believe. I think personally, there's possibly easier, cheaper, and less damaging ways to take over the world if you're a major financial institution and global corporates, which is who are being argued against. I think that I don't think there's a conspiracy theory. Do I think that some people will benefit quite dramatically? Then yes, they will, because they've seen an opportunity. And again, you would argue that the ones who've benefited most from Brexit are those who were kind of involved in hedging finance deals and looking at what was happening with currency movements as a result of votes going in certain directions. Whether there's a conspiracy for that, I'm not too sure, but there are people who've gained quite opportunely from movements in that respect. The idea that the vaccine is going to inject a Microsoft chip in me or whatever.
No, Jeremy, I even don't speak about this.
And it's in the UK, we've actually had a really interesting, there's a campaign video that's now come out and been adopted by mainstream media, which is predominantly ethnic minority-led politicians, sports people, comedians, actors, influencers, you know, people in the public profile, who are coming out and just saying it's, you know, it's not made of pork. It won't adjust your DNA. All of these things. It doesn't contain a microchip, and the fact that we have to say this is quite interesting. But I think one of the key things is slightly wider, which is as a race, as a society, we've moved a little bit from being citizens to being consumers with rights. So if you're a citizen that contributes, is slightly different to being a consumer with rights. So it's my right to have my opinion. It's my right to say what I can and can't do and all the rest of it. My favorite one about the conspiracy idea is that it was posted recently in the UK when we had a spell of bad weather. And again, compared to Bulgarian winters, it's probably nothing. But the conspiracy comment was along the lines that the winter cold was created by the clothing shops to make you buy their clothes. So rebel, don't succumb, go out naked. It's your right. And I just think that kind of sums it up, really. It happens.
Yeah, but you know, Jeremy, some people are using all this target group to create like a political auditory, and my fear in my question was, do you think like that Bulgaria could shift in different direction, like because of all that? You see, like even like the countries like Hungary, they're which getting some autocrats with.
I think
there is a possibility.
Yeah, populism and extremism are worries, whether it's COVID, Brexit, nationalism, or whatever it is, and there is a problem. I think people and individuals are generally looking for things to latch onto, looking for content, they're looking for contact. The trouble is that extremism tends to make the media interesting. So if you're a journalist, And there's a famous phrase in the UK, which you may have a version of, which is that dog bites man is not a story, man bites dog is a story. So you're looking for an extreme rare situation which people will then be interested in. And I think that's where it happens. Media and a rolling 24-hour media needs a new something to say. They need something to catch on and get people to look at it. I think I don't know enough about Bulgaria's politics, but recently I think we saw that even the Dutch were demonstrating against lockdown issues. And when the Dutch start demonstrating, then you know you're in trouble, because they're such a usual peaceful Pacific race nation. In Britain, we comply and moan. That's what we do. We complain about things, but we let it happen to us. I think where you have slightly more assertive personalities within countries, you'll get different things happening and different responses. But the fear is that people will see that a vaccination program is changing how we could act. And also it's been, you know, we're coming up for a year of lockdowns, imposition and things like that. And again, this principle of being consumers means that people resent it. Why is this being done to me, as opposed to how can I continue to live in this environment? And we also have to maybe look at a world and a society where for a period of time there's a bit more risk to it. That's the challenge.
But the media anyways are part of the democracy, and for me it's interesting what democracy means for you, because a lot of people are jiggling with this word, and for me it's like it's interesting what democracy means.
Well, democracy I think varies where you are in the world. In America, you can buy democracy, I think, is a sweeping thing to say, and my American chums will probably some of them will be angry with me and some of them will go, yeah, you're absolutely right. To me, democracy means that I have the right to be involved in the decision making of issues that affect me and my world. So it's about being self-determining within a framework that respects other people's ability to self-determine. There's an element of cooperation, coercion and compliance in democracy.
And you as American, what the freedom means, because it's like it's a very American word. What means to be a free man?
Free means the ability to do things even if you don't necessarily need or want to do them. It's a big question. You've caught me on the hop with that one, I'll be very honest. I think it's freedom is predominantly self-determination. So my definition of freedom is that can I go somewhere? Can I speak to someone? Can I read something? Can I do something without it being restricted? I was going to say, and it has to be legal, but then who defines what is legal? This is very deep, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah, I would say that freedom is, I tell you where freedom is as an experience, and this is something I've not done for a while, but when we used to go on holiday in Europe, so we'd drive over, we'd get the train on the tunnel, or we'd go on the ferry, and we get to Calais, and when you come out of Calais docks, there's a curve, and that road becomes like a big open motorway. And I always felt for about 5 minutes I could go anywhere, and there was a feeling of being in the car and pulling onto that road and just thinking, you've got France, and then you've got Spain and the Low Countries, and you've got Germany, Austria, and down to the Eastern Europe, and you know, with enough petrol I could go anywhere, and that felt free. And I think that's something that we're going to miss, although we can still have it. You just might, you know, going back earlier, we used to have to show a passport, we had to make declarations and all sorts of things. So you know, you're applying restrictions to things that we used to have, but so be it.
Thank you. And one last question. I'm waiting for interview with Jeremy Corbyn. Can you ask him a question? Nice.
I don't do a lot with, I do a lot with politicians, but I don't do a lot with politicians because I feel that politicians give you political answers. And I don't actually have a question for Jeremy Corbyn, because it would be historical as to why did he do certain things in the way that any past, I would struggle to find a question for any of our previous leading politicians, to be honest. I'd like to talk to current ones specifically, but past ones, and although he is an MP, that's a really interesting question, because I know
maybe as a person, Jeremy. He's one of the significant figures in the last.
He is. I guess the question is, do you regret any of the positions that you took during the election campaigns that you took part in?
Okay, thank you very much.
I haven't found many politicians that say they regret anything, but they'll say that they misspoke, but they won't say they said the wrong thing. But I think it's an interesting one, because talking to yesterday's man or woman, you would just tend to sort of berate them on what you think they got wrong, or praise them on what you got right. I mean, I did an event where we had a former Home Secretary, and it was just fantastic to sort of, and he was Home Secretary under Tony Blair, and that was really interesting. But it was very much it was very much retrospective about what happened and understanding it. So it would be interesting to ask him why he thinks he became leader when he was such the outside man in that leadership race for the Labour Party. What does he think he offered that the others didn't?
I'm gonna ask him. And Jeremy, then it's gonna be another question for you, maybe just to continue with Jeremy Corbyn, because I saw that it was interesting and very provocative for you. But he was like, you know what? I was thinking about him, and I was thinking that if he wasn't like the leader of the Labour during this process of the Brexit, I'm not sure that somebody else could stand so firm as he stand during these Brexit events. Because at the end, if we have to be honest about something about him, he defend democracy by saying, okay, this was the will of the people, and this is the will that we should do it.
And I think you're right. I mean, going back to your question of democracy, in that instance, democracy was defined as 50.01% versus 49.99% as the tipping point. So I think the definition of and that's where democracy is interesting, because if democracy is deciding, as we saw with pure majority, then President Trump would have been impeached. If democracy is decided as a minimum threshold, then he wasn't impeached. So where does, democracy is really interesting. And in fact, like many countries, our government is formed by people who voted by less than 40% on average of the population they lead. But then you have to have a majority, otherwise you end up with multiple coalitions who never agree anything. So that's, I think that's an interesting one. But yes, you're right. He defended that democratic resolution as it was decided in that moment, by saying that he wouldn't choose to reverse it, which is, that's interesting. But I think my question goes back is, why did he think he won, and would he have done anything different as leader? Fascinating. Good. Let me know what you do with this. I'd be really interested to see it. And if you edit it and take my words out of context and make me into a radical, I'll hunt you down.
No, I will not do that. I will not do that. We're gonna
Chop me
see
up.
what I'm gonna cook with all the information that I got from you. I
Yeah.
hope that we're gonna end it up in some way in the TV.
Yeah.
And anyways, it's gonna be a nice interview.
Yeah.
And
Really
I'm
good.
gonna
It's good to
try
see it.
to be straight on the line.
Yeah, it's good. I enjoyed it because you made me feel slightly uncomfortable. So well done.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
All right. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Bye.